They are on. Welcome to this week's meeting of the Rockland Board of Selectmen, coming to you live on WRPS from the H. Bernard Monahan Memorial Room at Rockland Town Hall. On the agenda tonight, we've got an update on Rockland Saves, an update on Estes Auto, and an update on the Park Street fire site. Now, here's the Chairman of the Board of Selectmen, Mr. Ed Kimball.
Good evening. Welcome to tonight's meeting. Would you all please rise and join us for Pledge of Allegiance? Mr. Ryan. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would you all please remain standing for a moment of silence for Mike McDonald, former tree warden and sewer commissioner, and Bob Paulden, former planning board member, Rockland Centennial Committee member, and Operation Goblin member. Thank you. Good evening and welcome. Please be advised that this open meeting is being broadcast live, recorded by WRPS for playback on Comcast Channel 14 and Verizon Channel 31. It will also be available for online video on-demand viewing at WRPSRockland.com within 24 hours of its conclusion, as are other recently recorded meeting and community events. Please go to WRPSRockland.com for further information. Item number 1, community announcements. Mr. Chalker? None, other than the upcoming snowstorm.
I would remind everyone, no street parking the day of the storm they'll be plowing.
Yeah, we have an on-street parking ban, overnight parking ban, especially important with the impending snowstorm that's forecast for this upcoming Thursday. Minutes, item number 2, open session minutes of December 19th, 2017.
Make a motion to approve, Mr. Chairman.
Second. All those in favor? That's a unanimous vote. Thank you. Next up on the agenda, we have Rockland Saves update.
This inadvertently stayed on the agenda. I can tell you, Mr. Chairman, that we reached 3 of the 5 goals. I think I told you at the last meeting, and we are considering reapplying for yet another round, so those residents that didn't participate may have the opportunity again. I would hope the goals would be lowered. I certainly hope that everyone took advantage of it in the first round, but we may be back. If you look at the sheet that was included, we almost doubled the number of refrigerators and freezers we wanted to get out, thermostats that we wanted to increase. We were at least 1/3 over on the heating systems. We're a little short on air sealing and insulation. However, I think we received almost $17,000, which we're going to use here in town for other energy efficiency projects. It wasn't a whole lot to the town because of the community participation, but that might allow us to repair, for example, the charging station we have for electric cars here, which we don't charge people to recharge on. Only one side is working now. We're going to check the library. We're looking at possibility of installing a couple of solar lights in the new park on the side of Town Hall. Things that will increase energy efficient awareness was the only restriction placed upon us for those funds. We could not use it for staffing. So, but it was a very successful season, and I want to thank Able, who was the company we used, and certainly Marcy Birmingham, who coordinated a lot of this project. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Next up on the agenda, we have the Estes Auto update. Mr. Chalker?
With us tonight is Sam Butcher, and he is the engineer that we have been using actually for 2 projects. So he is going to do project 1 and 2, or agenda items 4 and 5. He'll be talking tonight first about the Estes Auto site. Sam, if you could come up, and he has appeared before us before. There is a flyer in your, there's some information in your books, as well as an update on Park Street. We're trying to make sure that Park Street does not become the 30-year deplorable site sitting there in the middle of our downtown revitalization. So we're trying to get our next best options with any information we can so it doesn't sit forever. And with that, Sam, if you need a pointer for your, this is our laser pointer.
I'll take it now. Thank you very much. I guess thank you very much for having me. I guess I'll start by saying if you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt. I tend to jump into a lot of acronyms that can get a little bit confusing. You may recall that the town applied for a mass development grant, and since that time we've been completing a number of assessment activities at the Estes Auto Parts property. The biggest visual change is actually just the removal of the vegetation, which had nothing to do with the assessment work. It just provided us access to the building. The update is really quite simple. The three elements that we were really rolling out were an evaluation of the presence of asbestos in the building materials. We are happy to report that we did not find evidence of significant asbestos in the building materials. If you are familiar with the site, you know that a significant portion of the roof is caved in, so there were some areas that we weren't able to gain access to, but those areas that we did gain access to, we did not find asbestos in the building materials. A second element of our assessment was the hazardous waste inventory. There we were looking for any drums, containers, materials that might have been left in the building, such as barrels of solvents. There is a parts cleaner that remains in the building, but it appears, as near as we can tell, to be empty. There were a couple of fuel oil tanks that had been cut and cleaned prior to us getting on site. They were done many years ago by the Environmental Protection Agency and others. And so we did not document any hazardous waste being stored in the building, which again is good information, with the caveat that a significant portion of the roof is caved in and we didn't have access to those areas of the site. Finally, we did soil and groundwater testing, and those results are actually quite positive as well. You may recall, if you've done any reading into the investigations that have been done out there, that just for getting your orientation, this is West Water Street on this far side, and then this would be the front of the Estes property. There was significant excavation of soil in this rear portion of the site. There was significant excavation of soil in the rear portion of the site that the EPA and others completed, and there was a concern that there was both lead and chlorinated solvents in the back where there was a septic system. There was also some soil excavation and testing in the front portion of the site, which is a little bit confusing because there isn't really a reason for it to be out there. And then lastly, the Department of Environmental Protection, I had correspondence with them over the past several years, and they were concerned that there was a solvent washer and a boiler room and other chemicals that were just being thrown out the back. They were initially concerned that chlorinated solvents from this area were migrating off the property. Our investigation included test borings and groundwater observation well installation in both what I'll call the rear portion of the property and in the front portion of the property. None of our soil samples indicated the presence of lead or chlorinated solvents in the soil, which is good. And frankly, I was a little bit surprised that there was nothing in the groundwater as well. It has been at least 20 years since those wells have been sampled. There are a couple of wells that were installed by others that remain. And we didn't find anything, so that's obviously good news. The one caveat is that the groundwater elevation went down in the fall. We're in a near drought situation at that time, so the water level is significantly lower, and because of that, several of the wells, 2 or 3 of the wells, were dry, so we were unable to sample them. So there is a little bit of a data gap with respect to the presence of chlorinated solvents in this area of the site. My recommendation is that we wait a couple months for spring, and hopefully the water table will come up and we'll be able to resample it at that time. We could go through the expense of installing additional wells now that are deeper, but I think I'm optimistic that if we wait the water will come back and we'll be able to sample them at that time. So my recommendations are that we resample the wells later. I also suggest that we contact the DEP. Right now, I'm having actually a hard time getting in touch with the DEP. They expressed interest a long time ago about being involved in the assessment work that we were doing out here. Since that time, they've had some budget cutbacks and people are very busy there, and I've been unable to reach them to talk to them about that. But I'd like to talk to them to make sure that we don't go through an assessment or a closure activity only to find that they want additional work at a later time. So I'm suggesting that we contact them to discuss potential concerns that they may have with respect to, especially the vapors migrating off the site. And if everything goes the way I hope it goes, we will be able to close the site out rather than apply for a remediation grant. You may recall that when we were discussing this, I believe it was in May, the plan was to do an assessment phase and then a remediation phase that would have involved a second round of funding through mass development. We're now to the point where we are optimistic that if the data doesn't show any surprises and if the DEP doesn't give us any surprises, we'll be able to close the site out much more quickly than we originally thought. Yeah,
Can I just ask you a
please.
based on that, and what happens like at that point once like the site is all closed out? And do we put it out to bid at that point, or are there more steps with mass development or DEP after that?
Well, with the DEP, there wouldn't be more steps.
Because everything's closed.
Because everything's closed. In Massachusetts, we don't need to wait for their approval
Okay.
to close out a site. It's a licensed site professional program, so it's a semi-privatized program. We can close the site out. The state has the ability to audit, and that's one of the reasons I want to talk to them before we try closing it out, because I don't want them to say, well, we're still concerned about. So the approach would be to have some informal communication with them, let them know that we are anticipating closing it out, and then see what their reaction is to that.
Okay.
My expectation would be that they would be fine with it, but one never knows.
It's really, I think, an exciting development. I mean, I drive by this site every single day. And to think that if we get to close it out, and DEP doesn't question us, then we're able to go ahead and auction it off. And we do have a couple of people who've talked about coming in, tearing the building down and building a business site on it and returning it to favorable use. We did talk at one point that the scale for the usage of the property is substantially harder to meet if you wanted to return it to residential use. However, business use is a completely different.
Yeah, that was gonna be my question. What are the use limitations that you anticipate on the parcel?
We're not anticipating any use limitations on the property at this time. We did not find any evidence of contaminants that would force us to restrict it.
Is there a general direction that the groundwater flows in the property? I mean, is it?
The topography falls off from this direction, down in this direction.
Yeah.
So that would be more or less to the southwest. And that's, the DEP is most concerned about the potential for contaminants to migrate. As you can see, there's very little space here for it to migrate from a source on the site and be able to pick it up again on the site. And that's why, that's why they were looking for possible off-site sampling, and that's why I want to have the discussion with them.
Certainly, if we were to bid this property at some point and someone were to be interested, we can still place restrictions, whether that's vegetated borders like arborvitaes or whatever, but certainly the site will look better than it does now, and you would have something to return to the tax rolls. A good neighbor, I'm sure. A couple of neighbors have already talked about the possibility if there needs to be a little more land, they would be willing to give up some of their land in the back. So it's a real possibility that we can return this, and the only obligation we have, I forget the number exactly, was it 15% of any revenues generated through taxes to pay back mass development for any funds that are expended in the cleanup. And that's over 20 years. Once mass development is either paid or it's 20 years.
It's a long period. I'm sorry, I don't recall exactly
I
what the
believe
number
it's
is.
20, and it could be 30. But the point is that at some point, even that sunsets, so that mass development, in order to rejuvenate their own fund, much like our own programs here in Rockland that we do through community development, any funds, 15% of taxes that we receive would be returned to the state to help fund the cleanup of other sites. But at some point, that ends in 20 to 30 years as well. So I'm really excited that a huge eyesore, I think, for the town of Rockland could be returned to both profitable and a little more aesthetically pleasing use for the community.
And faster than we originally anticipated. So
Was
it is good
there
news.
ever any testing on the adjacent property where it's, we'll say, running?
I'm not aware of any, no.
Okay, was there
And it
ever
wasn't part of any-
requests or anything like that? Nothing?
That is the concern that the DEP was initially discussing, and that's why I want to follow up with them on that. But I'm not aware of any.
I believe it's a residential property to
It
the
is a residential property.
left side of that.
You're correct, yep. Residential property is on all sides of it, in fact.
Yeah. Okay. So on to, any other questions from the board?
No, thank you.
On to
Okay.
Park Street.
Nice job.
On to Park Street while you're up there.
Yeah. Park Street, as you know, is the location of what I'll call the factory fire. We were asked to complete 2 tasks at that location. The first was, first in our agenda is what's called an ASTM site assessment. That is a review of records on file at local and state agencies. It's also a site inspection to determine whether there's evidence of any oil or hazardous materials on the property. Obviously, post-fire, an inspection like that is very difficult because it's a large pile of debris right now. And as a result of that review, we didn't observe anything on the surface that indicated that there were any oil or hazardous materials. There was a report from the fire chief that there were odd-colored flames during the fire, which leads us to think that there may have been chemicals on the property, and in fact, we found records that there were chemicals on the property. Whether they were consumed in the fire, we don't know. So our conclusion with respect to the site assessment is that we recommend a subsurface investigation, ideally focused around the basement area. The problem that we have is that we don't know exactly where the basement was, and because the area is so covered with debris, it's difficult to delineate exactly where the basement is. But our recommendation is that a subsurface investigation be completed on the property to determine if there is a release of oil or hazardous materials. Any release we find would probably have predated the fire, but the purpose of it would be to determine if there are any oil or hazardous materials in the soil or groundwater. We also completed an asbestos survey, and we did detect asbestos-containing materials really throughout the debris pile. That's largely a function of building materials being collapsed into the debris pile and then distributed among the debris. So our recommendation with respect to that is that really the entire debris pile is going to have to be treated as asbestos-containing material, with the exception of some of the steel, which can be probably reclaimed after it's cleaned. So it's sort of a two-pronged approach now, and I'll let Alan speak to what your priorities are, but there will be a need to address the asbestos, and there is a recommendation on our part that you also investigate the possible presence of oil or hazardous materials in the soil or groundwater.
We will be coming back to the board with a recommendation on what action to take. It may require the town to make that initial investment in order for us to make a decision, where do we go from here? Are we going to have to wait for a huge influx of federal money or state money, or is it something that we can get an assessment done that helps us determine what the value of the land would be, including the cleanup, even for us to say, all right, we would be willing to take the land for taxes because there's money owed on it, or work out some deal with the owners to release them, then have the property cleaned up and returned to some useful use. We're trying to spend a little bit of money now so that we're not faced with a 20, 30-year Estes problem here in Rockland, whereas, you know, if we spend the 30,000, 25,000, whatever that number ultimately comes into, we're at a point where we can assess that, yes, the entire site's going to take 200,000 or it's going to take 400,000, and a developer could come in there and then properly make their decision as to what their investment should be for that property. And at some point, even if we have to participate in order to return this property back to a 40R condition, that would return taxes to the town, and there may be some state funds available at that point. So,
And you may recall that one of the challenges with Estes was not just the contamination, but the uncertainty regarding the contamination. So developers were unwilling to come onto the property to invest in it without a sense of how much any remediation was going to cost. And what you're talking, what Alan's talking about is attempting to quantify what any remediation is going to be so that the developer can approach it intelligently.
Can I just ask a quick question? Based on the work, like in the program at the Estes property that we were in, like, could the same program also apply for Park Street? And could we be eligible for, or like if there were contaminants, like at Estes, just as a hypothetical, like we would be under the 15% of tax revenue that we get, we pay back to Mass Development. Could the same apply through a similar program?
It's possible.
Okay.
Mass Development, in my opinion, is very anxious to find visible, successful projects.
Okay.
And so in that respect, I think that it is that you would certainly get an audience if you wanted to discuss it.
Okay.
I think it would hinge upon whether or not there was soil or groundwater contamination,
Okay,
because the
which-
mass development funding is primarily geared toward that.
Got it.
And if there was, then what you'd try to do is push the asbestos piece in to be part of it.
Mm-hmm.
If there isn't any soil or groundwater contamination, I think it's actually a harder, it's a smaller overall cost, but
Yep.
it's a harder sell because the mass development funding, in my experience, is not geared toward asbestos.
That makes sense.
So that's sort of
Additionally,
an off the cuff.
we've been led to believe that, number one, we know we're capable of taking the land if we want to take it, but then do we assume the responsibility? And we went through a number of legal maneuvers in order to work through the Estes program, and that's a lengthy procedure. Additionally, if we're a little clearer on what the public safety hazard is or isn't, we'll be able to make a determination if we want to take that step. And I believe that we've been led to believe that while there are multiple owners of the site, that they're willing to walk away if we're willing to let them walk away for a reasonable price. At some point, they want to get away from any liability, and we own the, of course, we want to chase them for the liability. So we're trying to quantify what's the right position that we can get into to make something happen. If you look at the site from some of the overhead photos, or even if you drive by on the street, it's unsightly for the neighbors, it's unsightly for the people that back up to it. If you wanted to buy, live, or sell the property, live near the property, you'd have to be worried about, you know, we're trying to prevent this from being an eyesore in the center of Rockland for the next 20 years, generation.
Makes sense.
So,
Any other questions?
Good.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Sam, thank you very much.
Okay, next up on the agenda, what everyone's been waiting for tonight. The 2018 Stormwater Regulations, NPDES Phase 2, MS4 Permit 2018. presented by our own Deidre Hall.
You have your mic?
Yeah, I do.
Although the place to be tonight might be the zoning meeting. There seem to be a lot of people coming in here to the wrong
You're
room.
just going to click, I think you're
Yeah,
on the
that's
arrow.
great, thanks.
Let me get out of the
All
way.
right. So tonight I'm going to present a little bit about the new permit that's supposedly effective July 1, 2018. It's called the NIPD's Phase 2 Small MS4 Discharge Permit. John Laughlin wanted me to reiterate that there are many NIPD's permits that we are permittees of. This is just one of them. This is for stormwater. There are NIPD's discharge permits for our sewer treatment plant. There are NIPD's discharge permits for associated with our water because we have to use water to treat our water, and then that water we use to treat our water actually gets discharged back into the streams and the ground. So there's a NIPD's discharge permit for that. But this is strictly for small MS4, which stands for Municipal Storm Sewer System. Municipal Storm Sewer System. Okay, so that's what it stands for. So it's a NIPD's small MS4 permit is what I'm talking about today. The history of the MS4 discharge permits, the original regulation came under Phase 1 permits. Phase 1 permits, the only two Phase 1 permits in Massachusetts are with Worcester and Boston. They're much bigger than us, and they have different regulations. The first Phase 2 permits went into effect in 2003, and the rationale behind it was that there was a study done starting in 1983. It was a longitudinal study that found that 55% of receiving water impairments come from pollution that's carried by stormwater runoff. So it was a longitudinal, long-term study that found that the majority of our contaminants in our waterways come from our stormwater runoff. So that was the impetus, I guess, to start regulating stormwater. The history of this permit specifically, there was a draft that came out in 2015 where municipalities and anyone who was subject to it had the opportunity to comment. Comments were made and submitted. The EPA changed the permit in result of those comments. They incorporated some, rejected others. And then the permit came out in 2016. It was supposed to implement in July 1 of 2016, so the beginning of FY17. And what ended up happening was it was supposed to do July 1, 2017. So it was the end of the 16 permit was supposed to implement July 1, 2017. But prior to that, there was a group of municipalities in the Charles River. There's a lot of restrictions on the Charles in this. So groups of municipalities of the Charles River, as well as some nonprofits, appealed the permit. The appeal went nowhere in the courts, but they eventually appealed after the election of Trump to Mr. Pruitt. And Mr. Pruitt granted a stay of this permit. So it did not come into effect on the 17th. The stay was issued like a week before the implementation, and it was held off till next July to align it with the New Hampshire permit. Okay, so brief history on the permits. So I want to talk a little bit about stormwater nationally, and then regionally, and then within the Commonwealth, and then get into us. So nationally, America's wastewater and stormwater infrastructure get a grade of a D from the American Society of Civil Engineers, partially because it's just really old. According to the study, $298 billion is what needs to be invested over the next 20 years to keep our wastewater and stormwater systems functioning effectively, which is twice what we currently invest. And sewer pipes are the biggest cost. Just some fun facts, there are 800,000 miles of public sewer pipes in the U.S., and it costs about $100 to $300 per linear foot of sewer rehab. The reason sewer is really important in this instance when we're talking about stormwater is because the big dollar item in this permit is about the impact that the weaknesses in our sewer system have on our stormwater system. And that's in Minimum Control Measure 3, which I'll talk about. So the big dollar item in this permit has to do with the rehabilitation of our sewer system in order to protect sewage from getting into our waterways. So EPA Region 1 is made up of Massachusetts, the other New England states, as well as 10 tribal nations. Most states in the United States have a permit that's issued directly from their state regulators. There are 4 non-delegated states. New Hampshire and Massachusetts are one of them. What that means is our permit does not come from Mass DEP, it comes directly from the EPA. So there are about 450 regulated communities in New England. I believe there's 260 or so in Mass. Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire are currently operating under the 2003 small MS4. Again, the 2017 renewal for Mass has been deferred 1 year, and in 2018 there's the renewal for New Hampshire. And then we can talk about the state of the Commonwealth and our water infrastructure. In 2012, does it say there? Yeah, Suzanne Bump, her office established a bipartisan committee called the Water Infrastructure Finance Committee that studied our water infrastructure across the state. And I have a link to that study if you want to read it. But and they found that there's a $10.2 billion funding gap for drinking water, $11.2 billion funding gap for wastewater, an $18 billion gap for stormwater. And there are the facts regarding stormwater. So 351 municipalities, 260 regulated MS4 communities. We have 20 communities also who are under enforcement from DEP for SSOs, which are sanitary sewer overflows. So those are situations where your sewage actually comes out of the pipe, gets on the street, gets in the waterways, gets everywhere. So if you have a lot of those, every one is reportable to the DEP as well as the EPA. And if you have a lot of those, you can get under consent with one of your regulators. So that's really the big push for what we'll talk about, which is minimum control measure 3, which is the big dollar figure on this permit. But that area, that map, all that red area is all the communities that have pipe drainage. As you see, when you get more rural, they don't have pipe drainage. They just have, street runoff. So it's more of a urban problem. All right, so a little bit about the current permit. Again, right now we're currently operating under a 2003 permit. It's a 5-year permit that is EPA's extended for 8 additional years. The current 2016 permit is a 60-page permit. It has over 600 pages of appendices, and it regulates 6 specific areas and activities that are related to stormwater management. So these are called the minimum control measures. Minimum control measure 1 is public education. Minimum control measure 2 is public involvement. Minimum control measure 3 is the illicit discharge detection and elimination program, which I said is really the big dollar figure of this permit. 4 is the construction stormwater runoff control. 5, post-construction stormwater runoff controls, and 6 is good housekeeping measures. The current permit we have now has all these minimum control measures as well. It's just not as meaty as the new permit. The new permit is a lot more meat in it, and a lot more requirements. Right now it's a little bit more loosey-goosey. It allows municipalities to have a little bit more control. The measurements is usually meeting to the maximum extent practicable. That's really the measurement. When you're meeting a goal under the current permit, you just have to prove that you're meeting it to the maximum extent practicable. So there's really no numerical standard to meet right now. It's kind of like a loosey-goosey standard. But the new permit puts a lot more meat behind what municipalities have to do. So we'll talk about each one individually. So public education, what's required is the municipality must conduct active outreach with at least 2 enumerated subgroups, which the 4 subgroups are residential, commercial, industrial, and construction. And they have to reach out to 2 of those groups each year of the permit. So the permit's 5 years. This includes a pet waste notification to all residents at the time of dog licensing. Because in urban areas, they found one of the biggest contributors to stormwater runoff pollution is dog poop. Minor issue, major problem. So one way we can meet this minimum control measure is by having a notification when we license our dogs to clean up after your pet. And you can check the box that you did something for your permit. So that's kind of an easy one to do. I've listed some of the potential departments that would be impacted by that, which would include the clerk's office, water and sewer departments, Board of Selectmen, because it has to do with outreach. That's kind of policy stuff. That's our stuff, and planning. This is a sample for public education. Only rain down the storm drain, something simple like this. I think this came from, City of Santa Rosa or something. But something simple like this is easy. We could even have a student make it. We could have a lot of fun with it, which is good. So minimum control measure 2 is public involvement. So there's 2 aspects to this. One is that your notice of intent, your stormwater management plan, which is due after the first year of the permit, and all your annual reports that you file with EPA every year have to be publicly available to everyone, which includes posting on the town website. So you got to do that. I don't believe we post, I don't think ours are on the website right now. And then another way we can meet public involvement is by creating and managing a citizen-led stormwater committee, and that also meets that requirement. A lot of places call it their Stormwater Outreach Advisory Committee. I thought that logo was kind of cute, so I threw it up there. But again, the potential impacts here would be a potential new advisory board, and it could be additional highway work and work for sewer if they're doing that sort of public involvement, having to put that stuff on the website. I also see this committee is, we're currently going into our NOI, so for the permit, the NOI is due 90 days after the implementation of the permit, so it's due like the last week of September. And we're working with environmental partners to help us with the NOI, and they need to reach out to all these potentially affected boards. But I could see this stormwater board being made up of members of those boards, which would make it a lot easier for environmental partners to do their NOI. So it'd be much, so then they'd only have to come and meet with one board that's made up of all these members from all these other boards, so that they're not bouncing around from board to board to board. So it could streamline that process a little bit. All right, so minimum control measure 3 is the illicit discharge detection and elimination program. So all outfalls and interconnections are when a town or community discharges into Rockland's MS4 system, or when we discharge into another person's MS4 system. So based upon our elevation, it's likely that Abington would discharge into us, or Weymouth would, or the air base. The redevelopment authority would discharge into us. So they'd all have adjacent interconnections, and then we would probably discharge into Hanover or Hanson on like the bottom of Beach Hill. So we'd have to map all those interconnections, and we have to sample at all of our outfalls and interconnections for the presence of ammonia, surfactants, chlorine, and bacteria. And for us, the bacteria we're looking for is E. coli, because all of our receiving waters are fresh. If they were salt, we'd be looking for a different bacteria. We also have to look for pollutants of concern, which are specific pollutants that are identified in Mass DEP's 303D list. So we have, I think, 5 different receiving waters that are impaired that Mass DEP has a list of other pollutants that we have to test for. Let me explain this sort of diagram. It's an arrow, and the larger the portion of the arrow, the more work, but the darker the color, the more cost, okay? So if it's a darker color, it's really expensive, but there may not be as much of it. If it's a lighter color, it's less expensive, but there's a lot of it. So when we do our dry and wet weather sampling, I'll come up with more numbers on Rockland, but we have about potentially 275 outfalls. We have 275 outlets. Not every outlet is a regulated outfall. We got to figure that out, but you'd have to sample at every single one of those during dry weather. The cost to sample an outfall, just the cost to test it, not for the man hours, but the cost to run the tests, is between $60 and $100, depending upon what you're testing for. So you do that over 200 and something outfalls, and that's your cost. And then mapping, like I said, we have to map all of the aspects of our drainage system. Mapping can be relatively expensive. A lot of it is a tabletop exercise, but then everything needs to be verified in the field with GPS coordinates. So there is a manned portion of that as well. Then there's the rapid drain manhole assessment. So what happens is when you test at the outfalls during dry weather, you shouldn't have flow. You should, because there's no rain, so you shouldn't have anything coming out. So if you go to the pipe and there's something coming out and you sample it, and you get a hit for pollutants, then that triggers that area is a priority catchment, and you need to do further investigation in that drainage area. Whatever water drains to that outfall, that whole area needs to be further inspected. If you go during dry weather, you sample it, there's no pollutant hits, you're not done. You got to go back during wet weather when it's raining and sample it, and then see if there's pollutant hits. So my recommendation would be, since the cost to test during dry weather isn't very expensive, and you have to visit every outfall anyways to map it, that sampling, which takes very little time, should be done the same time you're doing your GPS confirmation of the location of your outfall, because otherwise you have to go to your outfall twice. It doesn't sound like much, but in my experience, 50% of outfalls are accessible and 50% really aren't. They're under bridges, they're behind rocks, they're on private property, they're covered in brush. They're very hard to get to. So once you find them, you sort of want to just find them. Again, if you do have pollutants during the initial screening, you go to your rapid drain manhole assessment, and then you're popping manholes and you're grabbing samples till you can narrow down which pipe segment is causing the pollution. Then you drop your CCTV camera in to verify probably in the sewer, to verify where the defect is in the sewer, and then you eliminate the defect. So hopefully we have very few areas where we have to eliminate, because hopefully we find very few defects. So that's that.
How much of our drain systems drain right into the sewer system versus
It should be zero.
zero, right?
Drain it, yep, so we have what's called a separate storm sewer system. That's the MS4, separate storm sewer system. So it should be completely 100% separate. They should not cross.
Okay, so where is our outfall for the wastewater?
That's, okay, so the outfall for the wastewater is behind the sewer treatment plant. So when we have our sewer pipes that come out of our house, all of that goes in a smaller diameter pipe than drain, gets taken to the sewer treatment plant, is processed, cleaned. The clean liquid effluent is then discharged out of the outfall into the back end of French's Stream.
Right.
So that's one outfall. That's it. They have a separate NIPDES permit, has totally different requirements of what the contaminants in the water can look like when it comes out. This is for every other outfall, the remaining 275, potentially, that we have.
One of our major issues, however, a major issue for Rockland is there is some infiltration, which John Laughlin is continually battling,
Yeah.
so that the sewage, it's supposed to be a closed system, but in some cases, because of the age of the system and/or, I don't know what the right word is, but other infiltrations or uses, and it's very evident that every time we have a storm, that the gallonage going through the plant substantially rises.
What's
Well,
interesting is
I
that...
actually, excuse me, I actually knew all the answers to the questions I was asking, but I wanted to say that for the benefit of
Oh,
people
everybody
that
else.
listen, so that they understand what we got and what the difference is
Sure.
between the two.
What's
And
interesting...
the other
yeah,
one more thing
yeah,
is...
Yeah, sorry.
NOIs, notice of intent.
Yes,
And
notice of
I
intent.
only say that because my wife throws initials around all the time, and I have to stop and ask her what they mean.
What Alan said about the infiltration, though, is important, because infiltration means that there's rainwater getting into our sewer pipes and our drain pipes. That's why our flow at the sewer treatment plant goes way up during rain. But if rainwater can get into sewer pipes when it's raining, then sewage can get out of sewer pipes when we have some pressure in the system. So that's the exfiltration that can go into your drain system underground without us even knowing it, because drain systems are not built to be watertight. Because the point is, you're supposed to get water in the drain. It's supposed to carry the water. So because our water systems are not watertight, when sewage exfiltrates out of those cracks and little defects in the sewer system, it can get into the drain system underground without any of us knowing. And that's really what we're looking for with this IDDE program. We're looking to try to find those cracks in the sewer pipes by examining our drain system. Because CCTV work, whether or not those people who do it, it's very, very expensive. It's a lot cheaper to do this rapid assessment, way cheaper. I'll show you. I have some really interesting pictures of me doing some rapid assessment. But it's a lot cheaper to do that than it is to do CCTV work. All right, so that's IDDE in a gist. We also have to have a written IDDE plan. I have one that I've provided to the Highway Department into sewer, depending upon where this program is going to live, that we can use as to start, and we can amend it to make it work for Rockland, which is great. All right, so here's just a quick map so you can see sort of what I'm talking about when I talk about mapping. So this is Reed's Pond, Studley's Pond, whatever you want to call it. The outfalls are the yellow triangles. The drain manholes are the blue circles. The green squares are the catch basins, and I don't really love what they use for drain pipe, but it's the single segment, black segment. So what I've found when I've looked at the mapping, and I've really only looked at it initially, is that all of our outlets are mapped. We have a pretty good idea what those are. Our catch basin inventory is pretty good as well. Our manhole inventory is not as good, and part of the reason is I said a lot of mapping is a tabletop exercise. So if you put an overhead picture underneath this, you'd be able to see, oh, there's a manhole here, but you don't know whether it's drain or sewer. Do you see what I mean? So, because you just see the round circle, and you're like, manhole, manhole, manhole. But the catch basin, you know it's a catch basin. So I feel like we need some work on mapping our drain manholes. And then we need to map the connectivity, which is the pipe that connects all them together. So that's some of the mapping stuff that we have to do. Like I said, some of it's tabletop, but some of it does need human work to go out there and look at it. All right, so this is me grabbing a sample at the outfall. This is a pretty accessible outfall. So this is kind of what you do. You grab it in the cup, you take it back, you test it for the pollutants. Assuming that you get a hit, the next step would be to do rapid manhole assessment. That's me opening the manhole cover. I thought that was kind of funny. And then that's how you would do the rapid manhole assessments. You open the manhole cover, you put the sample stick in the sample cup down into the bottom of the manhole. Some of the manholes are really deep. Some of them are 20 feet deep to grab the flow. If it's dry, wet, you have to do this during dry weather. And again, during dry weather, there really shouldn't be flow, but because you have some pollutants here, you're going to get some flow. If there's not enough flow to grab a big enough sample, what you have to do is you have to sandbag, you have to drop sandbags in there and come back in like 48 hours and then sample what is caught behind the sandbag. So it's kind of a long process. You don't have to do that at every manhole. You do that at what's called key junction manholes, and those can be determined just by looking at the catchment and figuring out which ones you need to test at.
Is it one cost for the dry sample and wet sample, or is it?
One cost.
Okay.
What do you mean one cost?
Well, you said it was $60 to $100. Is that you have the dry sample, that's $60 to $100. You go back and do the wet sample, that's 60 to 100.
yeah,
Okay, so
yeah.
they hit you twice.
Yeah, they hit you twice. All right, and then these are our numbers. So again, we have approximately 275 outlets, but not all outlets are outfalls. And there's a definition of what an outfall is in the permit. So we need to get eyes on all of our outfalls to figure out which are actually regulated outfalls and which are not. We have approximately 1,735 catch basins and approximately 50 miles of drain pipe. All right, so that's the big ticket item. And one thing I want to say about the IDDE is that you have to sample all your outfalls, dry and wet weather, in the first 2 or 3 years. I want to say 2 or 3 years of the permit. But the investigation piece, the upstream investigation, is actually on a 10-year schedule, even though it's a 5-year permit. This is the federal government. So you do have a long time to do that investigation piece. And there's no obligation that, like, once you find the hit at the outfall, that you have to go and do something within a certain amount of time. The only time obligation is once you've verified where the pollution is coming from. So once you put that camera into the sewer pipe and said, that's the crack that's causing the leaching into the drain, then you're under a really strict timetable, like I want to say 90 to 120 days to fix that. And to line the pipe is very expensive. So when we get to the end, when we're getting down that arrow further and further to the small, there's a lot of planning that needs to be done. Once you verify that defect, you need to be ready to fix it immediately. So we need to have funding in place and all that. All right, so construction, stormwater runoff control. So this is minimum control measure 4. We need a new bylaw to prevent pollution runoff from construction sites. And the reason we need a new bylaw is because our current bylaw probably only meets the Massachusetts standards, and there's going to be stepped up standards here. It's going to require inspection of construction sites and follow-up to ensure compliance with the bylaw. The permit requires that the size parcel that's subjected to this bylaw has to be at least an acre. So they set the I don't know if I want to call it the floor or the ceiling, but they say you have to set it at least an acre. So if you're going to disturb an acre of land, you need to abide by the permit. However, if a community wants to set it lower, I don't know why they would. It would cost more, but maybe they're very environmentally friendly. Maybe they want to set theirs half an acre. You can do that, but you have to set it at least an acre. So I saw potential departments impacted to be sewer, highway, conservation. The reason is there's often a lot of overlap between this and the Wetlands Protection Act. So you'll find those two overlapping a lot. Board of Selectmen, again, because we have a bylaw, town meeting, and the building department, because they're really the enforcers of permits. And this is going to require some kind of permit. So we need to figure out who enforces it. Who's the one that goes out and inspects? Who's the one that issues, notices of noncompliance? So these are just, so you guys know what the hell I'm talking about. These are different stormwater runoff control. So this is a silt fence. I'm sure you guys have seen these around construction sites. So when it rains, it keeps the dirt, soil on site, so it doesn't go off into the road and then wash into the stormwater system. The number one pollutant in stormwater is sediment. These are silt sacks. So these go inside the catch basins so that if the sediment does get into the street, it gets caught in the silt sack, and you just empty the sack, and it doesn't go down into the drain. And this is a silt sock. Again, works a little bit like a silt fence. I actually like these better than silt fences personally, but works good on slopes. So I'm sure you guys have seen these when you go, but I'm just saying, like, you've probably seen these, you just don't know what the heck they are, but that's what they are. Okay, so post-construction stormwater runoff control. This is minimum control net measure 5. This is going to also require a new bylaw to ensure that stormwater BMPs, that's what we call them in the industry, but just think a water quality device. That's what a BMP is. It stands for best management practice, but just think water quality device. That they continue to operate as intended. And it requires annual review of these BMPs or water quality devices by the town. So right now, again, our bylaw would probably require, it would kick in under when you're in the wetland right now. This also has the 1 acre threshold, so this would include areas outside the wetland that we are disturbing at least an acre, so we'd have to include that. And it would be, the review would be similar to what Concom goes through when they're reviewing under the Wetland Control Act, when they're dealing with stormwater treatment in a wetland. But it's more stringent than the current stormwater standard. I actually wrote it down because I forget it sometimes. The standard is, hold on, I want to make sure. For a new development means the new site's going to have more impervious area than the old site. So it doesn't mean it's a new. It just means the old site was 80% impervious, the new site's 90% impervious. You have to comply with Mass Stormwater Standards, and you have to retain the first inch of runoff from all impervious area on site or design treatment so that 90% of the total suspended solid, it's called TSS, load is removed, and 60% of total phosphorus is removed prior to being discharged off the site. So basically you have to infiltrate, and in Rockland that's really hard to do. So this is going to be really hard for developers, for anyone to meet these standards. It's very hard to phosphorus. The only way to get rid of phosphorus is infiltrate, and it's going to be really hard for developers to do it. But we need to make sure that if it's more than an acre, if that's what we set it at, that any new development removes at least 60% of the average load of total phosphorus. That's the difference in the Mass Stormwater Standards. If it's redevelopment, so redevelopment isn't the way we would normally think of redevelopment. Redevelopment under this permit means that you're building on a site and you're making less impervious. Okay, so you're decreasing the amount of impervious. You have to comply with the Massachusetts Stormwater Standards, and you have to retain the first 0.8 inches, not the first inch, but the first 0.8 inches of runoff from the area for on-site design treatment, so that 80% of the TSS is removed and 50% of the phosphorus is removed. So again, these are going to be really tough standards for people to meet who are developing in the town. So I think we need to think about that when we set, whether it's an acre, half an acre, whatever we set that threshold at, we really need to think about that and weigh environmental concerns with the impacts for development, because that's going to be a tough number for our developers to reach, because it is really hard to infiltrate in Rockland. What is nice about redevelopment, though, I didn't mention, if you can't do it on site, like it's physically impossible, you can offer to mitigate off-site. So the person can say, well, Town of Rockland, maybe I can put a stormwater BMP on some piece of town-owned land and infiltrate the same and treat the same amount of water there, and we can say, yeah, that's okay. So you can do off-site mitigation for this too, which is kind of nice. All right. And okay, so this is a constructed wetland, so that you guys have an idea of sort of how they work. So the water would come in, there would be plants that sort of would take the pollutants out, and then the water comes out of the pipe. That's what we talked about with Union Point. That's what their detention basins are. And then this one is a bioretention swale. These are kind of like rain gardens. You see a lot of these in parking lots. So the water goes, there's little notches that are carved in to the side of the road or the side of the sidewalk. The water goes into where the soil area is. The plants sort of help take out some of the pollutants, and then there's a media that's put in there that helps filter out some of the pollutants, and the water infiltrates into the ground, into the under drain, and then connects into the drain system. So it's all the pollutants are removed before it goes into the drain system. And then this is a tree box filter, which I like very much. I think they're pretty. They're used as streetscape. Again, so the water would infiltrate down through the media. That's the yellow stuff. There would be a perforated pipe in the bottom, so some of the water would go through the perforated pipe into the crushed stone and infiltrate into the ground. And if there was a high water table at the time, it could go through the pipe to the right and connect into the drain system. So it's sort of a nice streetscape feature to have the tree box filter or the bioretention swales, but also you meet your stormwater standards. You can meet your phosphorus removal and your TSS removal. All right. And then these are more urban types of stormwater runoff control in areas that are very, very pervious. So the one on the left is an underground detention basin. So water is detained underground before it's discharged into the system. There's usually perforated pipe there too, so water can come out and infiltrate into the ground if need be. And on the right, you have a storm scepter. These are everywhere, where the pollutants fall to the bottom, almost into like a sump. They have to be maintained. You got to come in. You got to like whoever owns them has to make sure that the sediment and the pollutant load is removed on a regular basis. Good housekeeping. This is minimum control measure 6. So the good housekeeping minimum control measure is going to require that operation and maintenance plans, as well as stormwater pollution prevention plans for public facilities, which includes schools, fire, police, town hall, DPW yard, sewer treatment plant, all our playgrounds and parks, all our school, everything. I mean, every building that we have is going to need some sort of stormwater plan. So that's coming. That's in the first couple years of the permit. The ones that need full SWIPs, stormwater pollution prevention plans, would probably be our DPW yard, definitely our DPW yard. Our sewer treatment plant would probably need one. I'm not sure what our parks department looks like. I have to take a look and go through this like a checklist you can go through to determine if it's a hot spot, if it's going to need a SWIP, or if it's just going to need an O&M plan. It really depends upon what's stored there, but there's like a checklist you can go through to find out what's required. It's also going to require the town to provide more frequent services that it already does. So street sweeping is going to be required at least twice annually. I think we already do that though, Dave, right? Twice. Catch basin cleaning. The permit requires that all catch basins be kept below 50% full. So the way a catch basin works is the water goes into the catch basin and there's a sump in the bottom that's usually 4 feet deep. And then the pipe is not at the bottom, it's further up. And so you have to clean that sump. You got to come in with, I have a picture of a Vactor, with a Vactor or a clamshell, clean the debris out of the catch basin. The sumps can't be more than 50% full. Dave's been doing a lot of work with the highway department, cleaning out a lot of catch basins, as well as jetting a lot of pipes. I think our maintenance on our catch basins was less than stellar for some time until recently, and I think our debris had gotten to a point where it was now getting into our pipes, right? Because you're jetting the pipes as well. I mean, he's doing a lot of work. So we need to figure out, as we go out and clean them, we can get an idea of which ones are filling sooner, which ones may only need to be done every 3 years, which ones need to be done, twice a year. You'll find like the ones at the bottom of Beach Hill, like the ones in front of Dave's house, probably need to be cleaned more often because they're at the bottom of the hill, so all the water comes down the hill and gets into those catch basins, whereas the ones at the top of the hill, not so much. Stream and ditch maintenance will need to be done, and there's a requirement that the town retrofit existing drainage so that it is more green and can treat more TSS and more phosphorus. So the potential departments affected here is highways, parks, schools, everyone, basically. Every building we have is impacted and is going to be responsible for an O&M plan.
Will every catch basin have to be tested for pollutants?
No. All right, so here are some pictures of our guy. Well, this is our contractors, right, who come in to do catch basins. That's the Vactor. That's them backing out one of the catch basins. And then when they do the pipes, they'll jet with the jet on the truck, and then they'll back it out too. The disposal of this, I want to give props to Dave Taylor and to John Laughlin on the disposal here. Most communities are disposing of these by going to there's very few places you can dispose of them. They need to go to a lined landfill. However, you have beneficial reuse of them. It's a lot of work. It's a labor of love. You got to take them back to the yard. You got to dry them. You got to move them around. You got to make sure that, you're treating them properly when you bring them back to the yard, but we've been using them in the fill, right, for the roads and stuff? Yeah, so we're saving a boatload of money by not having to pay the tipping fee when you bring these to the landfills. And that's due to the hard work of our highway superintendent and our sewer superintendent. I know they worked on that together, which is great. So ways residents can help. Always want to take, if people see this, obviously this is a lot of work for the town, it's a lot of work for the town departments, and it's going to cost some money. But there are things residents can do that will help us in the long run. So the first thing is don't dump your fats, oils, or greases into your sewer system. That causes backups. When we get backups, we put our sewer pipes under pressure. When we put our sewer pipes under pressure, sewage escapes through those cracks and holes and defects into our sewer and gets into our drain. So if you don't dump that stuff, if you put it in your freezer, freeze it, and then throw it away, like Grandma used to do, you're saving, our sewer system, which is great. Don't dump anything down our storm drains or into our streams. That includes when I yell at my kids for putting rocks in it. Use fertilizers sparingly. Sweep up driveways, sidewalks, and gutters. Use non-toxic pesticides. Pesticides and fertilizers are often the highest. They produce a lot of phosphorus, and we won't have to remove as much if we don't put as much in the drain. Direct downspouts into gardens away from paved surfaces. If we don't put our runoff into the street, if we can put it into a rain garden or into a rain barrel, then we don't put pollution into the drain either. Check your car for leaks and recycle your motor oil. Pick up after your dog. Don't litter, and bring your hazmat to any hazardous waste drop-off events. That is my presentation. Are there any questions?
I've got a couple.
Okay.
So it looks like a lot of work, but what's the estimated budget to implement and start this? Then what's going to be the annual operating budget to maintain it once it's up and
Right.
running fully? Because it sounds like it's going to take a lot of help from highway, sewer, and then other committees at some point to make sure that, and other town departments, to make sure that everyone's in compliance once it's up and running. So, because we have budgeting coming up, and so really the biggest thing is the cost and how do we fund it, because sewer, a majority of the sewer work is done through sewer receipts. Highway, on the other hand, is done through raise and appropriate, it's from our tax revenue.
Yeah.
So,
I would say that potentially, the majority of the IDDE work could be billed to sewer, if we wanted to. If that's something that the sewer board wanted to. I mean, because they have their own board too, right? Because what we're really looking for is we're looking for defects in our sanitary sewer system. That's the point of the IDDE. All those things we're testing for, when you're testing for surfactants, you're looking for soap. When you're testing for ammonia, you're looking for human waste. When you're testing for chlorine, you're looking for water leaks. So the majority of what we're looking for is evidence, indicators of sanitary sewage in the drain. So we're using the drain as a tool to inspect the sewers, really, is what we're doing. So there's a really strong argument to be made, and I think most communities are doing it this way, to fund that portion from sewer. The only thing I would say that probably couldn't is if you were going to CCTV the drain, because unless you're looking, I don't understand what you would be looking for that'd be sewer related. Maybe you're looking for a defect in the drain, maybe it's coming from something else. But other than that, I've looked at it upside down and backwards. I think the majority of that can go to sewer if we wanted to. The other things, inspecting a site, certifying that a stormwater BMP works right, I mean, that isn't sewer. That's all land use and just runoff. But for the first year of the permit, mapping needs to be done completed after the first 2 years. So we have to start mapping, or at least work on more on mapping. Mapping the drain, probably not sewer. Mapping the sewer system, because that's required as part of this too, definitely sewer. The bylaws, those are land use things, so those need to be in place as well. So we need to draft some bylaws. Luckily, you have someone on the Board of Selectmen who's drafted some bylaws identical to what you need, so that should be helpful. But I think the big ones are going to be mapping. The public outreach isn't too bad. I mean, we already send out our dog licenses. It's just putting another flyer in there. The outreach isn't too expensive. So I would say that for the IDDE, the majority of it probably could go to sewer if the sewer board was amenable to that, I'm assuming. I don't know the number, though. Like I said, it would depend on the number of outfalls we have. If we started with 275 outfalls, if that's the number we wanted to go with, to budget with, you're looking at $100 an outfall.
5,500.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, 5,500 for the
For that,
sampling.
and then you'd have
Never
to do,
mind the
and then
mapping.
assume it for wet, and then you got to do it for
Yep.
mapping. Like I said, I think it's best, the labor, the real cost isn't in the sampling. It's with paying somebody to go out there and go to the outfall, look at it, grab the sample, run the test. If you're at the outfall, you might as well do the mapping portion too, which is GPS located, take a picture of it. There's a few other things you got to do. Measure it, determine what its condition is based on NASCO standards. You know, it's a 5, it's a 2, it's a 3, it's a 4, whatever it is. Do all that while you're out there. So you only have to go out there once. You're only paying the guy or the woman to go out there one time and just get it all done at once. That's what I would recommend.
Because the issue we have is currently our sewer department, the majority of the work is subcontracted out. Highway department is a combination of both. We have town employees and then we have subcontractors to help, we'll say, complement what the highway can't do depending upon timing or task scheduling. So the biggest thing with this is if we are to come up and do this is what's the time frame, what's the minimum we have to do, what's the maximum? And then on the technical aspect, are we going to need to go through and hire a consultant or somebody who's on call? Because it's, I mean, it's asking an awful lot to get it going, and I'm not opposed to trying to get something going because I think we should do something. But at the same time, we also have to look at what are going to be the direct benefits of it for the investment for the town. And then when we go back, when you talk about whether we do new or remodel and developments, unfortunately, unless it's a commercial development or a larger residential development, a lot of our projects aren't going to meet that 1 acre threshold because it's only a 3/4 acre minimum to have housing, and land in town is already scarce.
I was worried about and how this would affect Southfield.
Yeah, so I've actually talked to them a lot about this because they weren't really aware of it either, about the construction control and the post-construction control. But we need to know, like I was like, well, we're going to have to talk to you about where interconnections are. And so they know that but they probably, I have to look, but I bet you because they have so much federal action too, that they may have their own permits, like that go above and beyond what these general permits require. It's likely that they may. So, but I would say that, I can tell you that I've done this work before. When some of it we did in-house, some of it we subbed out. When we subbed it out, it was the cost to test plus the sub. There's very few companies that do this well. Let me just start there. There's very few. I probably know 3 that do it well. And it costs $250 per location. That was their labor cost.
So if you're looking at 250 plus maybe an upcharge of 100, we'll say you're 350 a location.
Plus for
So you're
wet.
350 times 200 locations, you know, that's 70,000.
Yeah.
And then you're looking at the technical aspect, then you're looking at the added labor for someone to go through, review it on our side, back and forth. So, I mean,
Yep.
you're probably safe to say you're going to need a budget of 100 to 125,000 minimal in order to get something
If you're
started.
gonna contract it out, yeah. And the 250, I actually broke it when I did it that way. I broke it down that way on purpose because I wanted to know what it was per, so I could figure out how much I had my money in my budget for. That included, all the reports. That was in that 250 was built in everything they were doing for me. So it was a data collection, we had mapping so that they could link right to. We don't have that mapping yet, so that's a little hole in
But
our
we
system.
don't have an
But-
individual like you who's on the payroll, so we have to hire someone like that.
But
So-
we can do the mapping. I mean, the mapping's, lots of people can do the mapping. The mapping's it's a pretty easy thing for people who know how to do it. But that $250 included, linking all the data to the right asset on the GIS. It included use of a technology, in the field, an iPad to do what, included all the labor associated with the testing. And it included bringing the samples to the lab because some of the sampling needs to be done in the lab, some of it's done on the back of the truck. And it included the report that they gave me at the end. So that was all built into that 250 figure.
Well, it's added value if you're starting out because you want to start off in the right way, so you have the correct data, and you're not going back and have to do it again and again.
Yep.
But more importantly, we have to figure out, of that, we'll say if those upset costs of, say, they're $150,000, what percentage would be attributed to the sewer if they're agreeable to that? And then what percentage would the town be on the hook for so that we could, it's going to have to be a two-pronged approach because we're going to need to go through and do this in conjunction with the sewer department if we are to implement this in the next round of budget.
Yep.
So we need to really get that. Dave?
Yeah.
Keep in mind, I know you're looking for numbers. I met with finance probably a month ago, and I talked to Jedra about this, that we did a lot of jetting and backing. We had some problem areas in town. What we did is we broke those areas up into 8 areas of town. And we did probably an area and a half. Most of the areas, we went from Reed's Pond, and we went all the way over to the Hanover line. So we started, say, John Dunn Drive, and everything in that area all the way to Manzella Court was backed and jetted.
Yeah.
So and since then, with the heavy rains and everything, we haven't had any water problems whatsoever. And keep in mind, a lot of those drains, I mean, Concord Street probably being one of the worst, were probably 8 foot deep, and when they popped the covers on it, we were about a foot from the cover.
Plants growing out of it.
Right.
No,
But-
I
but
understand
that's
that they were
not-
clogged and
but-
they needed to
And
be
in
done.
defense of, in the defense too, the clamshell that we use, I mean, once you hit the hard pack on one of those, that's about as far as you're gonna go.
Yeah.
So, you may have a catch basin that you may have thought was 4 feet deep, or maybe even at the most 5 feet deep, when in all practicality, you had, a 7 foot, 8 foot catch basin, which you could only get by jetting. Adding water and circulating it around and vacuuming it out. And then from that point, you jet over to the next one, and you go from there. But, what you brought up is a good point. We did put in, when I met with finance, we put in for $50,000 to allow for that. But what we've done is all the new roads we did, we figured out what it would cost per road to do that. And if you break it down, it probably costs you, we've got a great deal with Hoadley. They came in the lowest around, and they gave us a home discount. It breaks up to about, we'll say, we did the roads we did last year and the roads we did this year. Take Myrtle, which is a big road with a lot of drainage on it. That road probably cost us $400, which was paid out of the road budget. So it didn't affect our overall budget. But when we go, say we did the school project, where we did all the Chapter 90, and we had a ton of drainage issues over there with the, with the curbing and the sidewalks, we wanted to amend at the same time. That came out of our general budget, which you saw, and I met with finance, that was upwards of around 20,000. So that, came into, directly onto our budget. So we did put in with finance for $50,000, and also for, hopefully another man to help with some of that. I mean, between the catch basin cleaning and a guy out working with Hoadley's and doing the street sweepings and the clamshells, and then doing the, the underlayments, moving that around, and,
All
screening
that
it.
work, though, I think that's not sewer. That's
Right.
general fund money.
Right.
So
That's-
anytime you do, because that's 6, so that's just, if you can fit it in box 3, remember I did this box 1, this box 2, there's 6 minimum control measures. If the work can be fit into 3, it's sewer. If it's in any of the other boxes, it's general fund money.
So what if you find?
No, I understand that. The
Right.
idea was, we have to make sure that the sewer,
What's the cost on that?
if they're agreeable to it, that they have some provision so they can get it out of their budget as well.
Right.
Because sewer and water, as you know, they're the ones in capital improvements who always are planning 10 years down the road for equipment replacement and things like that, and they have the ability to bond, and makes it a little bit easier because it's through receipts. We, on the town side, though, we're subject to, unfortunately, what comes in for revenue, and then any major events, like now we're facing storms, so we're going to be doing deficit spending for snowstorms. We don't know where we're going to be at the end of the year, so even if we were to budget X amount of dollars to this, unfortunately, it may have to be absorbed to take care of snow and ice deficits.
I think Dave's
we're trying
right
to just
on.
kind of get a number.
I think Dave's right on with what he's asking for what he's doing.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
if you keep in mind what we got done this year, now, after this, we can maintain that area for so many years with the clamshell. We can do that in-house without having to sub it out. So we'll go to another area next year, and then another area. And keep in mind, as say we do 15 roads next year, those areas will get done at the same time. So now you're almost doing another half an area at the same time. That's pretty much what we did. We almost did 2 full areas last year. So, within 5 years, we can have everything vacked and jet it, and then we'll go back into it, and then you'd end up doing, instead of one area a year, you'd end up
Yeah.
doing 2 areas, because you're not gonna have as much debris in
Yeah.
those, and we'd be able to keep up with it, and which would help with the MS4.
Yeah,
So-
I think what Mike was saying is if we do find a problem, let's say we do find we have to fix it. And the way you fix it is either you line the pipe, you dig the pipe, you replace the pipe, then you're talking major cost of construction. Then normally what you would probably do is you'd find a problem, hopefully if you time this all right, you don't find the problem until you have a better idea where it is, and then you find 6 problems at the same time, do you know what I mean? And then
understand
go out
that
and
part
bond
of
it,
it.
you know what I mean?
We were just
Fix it.
looking at if we're going to implement a program, what we need to budget to implement the program. And then at the same time, Dave would be part of that because he'd have to do the
Yep.
maintenance to actually
Yep.
handle whatever we implement in. And then you'd have a budget if you were to have a problem, because we know there's problems out there and we're going to need to find what they are. But just to get this, say, started,
Yep.
we need to know what the initial investment might be, even if
Yeah.
it's a range. And then on an annual basis from that point on, it's something that's going to need to be included.
Yeah, I think
So,
we have to
I mean, we're
revisit it every
setting up
year, though.
something that would be,
And if I could, Mr. Chairman, and you're right on the same target, we met probably for about 2 hours, Selectman Hall, Dave Taylor, and John Laughlin and myself, and went over this. I need an education, much like the board had received tonight. But a couple of things we've been doing, and even, to Dave's credit, he's been doing a lot of great things here with the Highway Department. One of the stated goals of this board over the last few years has been to increase the budget for the Highway Department as well. If you remember, we only had, it was under $100,000, I believe, a few years ago for road maintenance, which is simply not enough. So the stated goal was to try and increase that by about 100,000. We haven't hit it every single year, 100,000 a year until we got to at least $500,000. Now that might mean that some of that stated goal might have to be diverted into roads and drains, et cetera. At the same time, this certainly is a train barreling down the tracks to the town where we're going to have to look at increased budgets. We talked to John Laughlin about sharing that which is the sewer department's responsibility will be paid for by the sewer department. But it's something that we don't have a choice. The federal government's starting to peer. They've waited, they're 8 years past their 5-year plan. Now, whether or not with this administration or not this administration, this someday is going to come, whether we get another 1-year delay. So we're looking at it. We've talked about whether or not we add them in this budget or the next budget. We just don't know today, and we do have a budget presentation for you at the next meeting, and we'll be working all spring. But we know that we're going to add some money to, as a result of stormwater. We know that sewer is going to take certainly a piece of it. It might mean an additional man because of the additional work to the highway department. Also, we have been increasing the budget or trying to increase the budget. I think we're up around 300,000, and it's still not enough
Alan, is
to
this
maintain the roads.
outside of the additional manpower for the department? Is this something that maybe, without knowing which department to give the budget to, that we just put it towards the Finance Committee Reserve Fund for the first year? We increase that budget and have it just the sewer department or the highway department
Well, I
as
think
something
we-
comes up?
I think we will be spending it this year, and we've got to go forward. It's also an area where, in some instances, for example, as the presentation showed, the post-construction requirements, somebody has to go out and inspect these areas where it's supposed to retain the water and where it's supposed to be filtered right and properly. So one of the it might be one of those areas that we're always talking about, a regionalized approach. The town of Rockland may not need somebody
40 hours,
full-time,
yeah.
but if we can share a person through our connections in the South Shore Coalition and or through, I'm drawing a blank on that state.
In Norfolk County, the Watershed Association provides almost like a subscription. So you pay a fee to be part of the Watershed Association, and they'll meet number 1, they'll meet number 2 for you. They'll give you the bylaws you need for number 3. They'll give you a checklist to what the person's supposed to inspect for when they go out there. So We have a watershed association here with the North River Watershed Association that we are members, I don't know if we're members of, but we're definitely within the association area. I haven't seen them want to take the bull by the horns and do what some of these other watershed groups are doing. I don't know why, but but that would be like a regional approach, because the idea is, the stated goal of the permit is to clean the waterway. So it would make sense if the stewards of the waterway, do you know what I mean, had some skin in the game and decided we want to help out. I don't know if they're going to, though.
So we're hopeful that, that our regional planning agency, as you know, we're part of the South Shore Coalition, so to speak. But through the Massachusetts, and you can tell I've been away a week, I've already forgot, but I can draw the names up. But, we're going to a meeting the end of this month. Certainly, we're all going to be at the MMA convention. I'm sure that this is going to be one of the topics that they'll be talking about January 19th, 20th in Boston. So we're going to be looking for regional approaches as well as we scale this thing up to operable. I'm not quite sure about the reserve, but certainly something.
I think it just gives us a better idea, and we keep track of the receipts as they come in.
Right.
So we have a better idea for the next year when we build the budget to say X amount to sewer, X amount of highway, plus whatever increases we see over the next year.
Obviously, we have to look at that, and certainly we're looking with Eric, but we can have the set-aside account that has to be specifically
for that purpose.
for that purpose, because we do have a compliance, and we have a schedule we have to meet.
Yep.
So we are very fortunate to have Selectman Hall's expertise, and the expense is not all that great with Selectman Hall.
Regarding the mapping,
Yeah.
don't we usually have most of that stuff marked already?
John originally did the GIS mapping through EPG, I think it was 2012.
Yep.
And then we just picked up on it last year. We had it brought over to highway as well.
Right.
So just like Deirdre said, you got a lot of that can be updated.
Yeah.
And-
The permit
and
spells
structured,
out
but-
exactly what needs to be mapped,
Right.
and we're only about 30%, I would say 30% of the way there.
Really?
So, yeah, because we'd have no pipe connectivity for drain, there's none. We definitely don't have all of our drain manholes mapped, because you can tell just by looking at that, you have catch basins with no manholes connecting to the catch basin, which just doesn't happen. You got to follow the pipe back. And you also have to have your catchments delineated, you need to have, eventually be able to calculate how much impervious area. The idea is they're building to something else, so they want you to be collecting data and constantly collecting data. And I don't think we have asset IDs for everything either.
No, but we have the basic, like the basic package, say 2012 was probably $10,000 to
Yeah.
do back then, but you can add layers
Yeah.
as you go. So
Yeah.
EPG is who we reached out to help us with the permitting. So it just makes sense to go back with them, and they could, as we do this, we could add layers onto that, so we could pull layers off of the
That's
GIS mapping.
That's another thing I didn't touch upon when I talked about mapping. Right now, all of our mapping is handled by an off-site consultant. It's probably not ideal. We probably want somebody here to be the keeper of that data, because it's our data, we paid for it, we own it, we should have access to it when we want to. We shouldn't have to pay somebody else to get us access to our data. I don't think right now we have anyone with the full expertise to hold that data, to be the holder. I know Dave's been working a lot, like getting more, it's hard. I've taken a lot of classes in GIS, and there's a lot of stuff I still don't know. But you need somebody that has some expertise in this area to be like the holder of that data. So I don't know if there's somebody who may want to train. You can learn it. It's not, I didn't know anything about it 4 years ago. But you just need to put the time in to learn it.
So we're exploring. This is coming at us, but as we get closer to town meeting, we'll have more bylaws. We'll have a better idea on budget. We'll have a better idea on division of labor. And as you said, Mr. Chairman, you sound just like I did as Deirdre was educating me at this meeting. And one of my frequent refrains were, what's this going to cost? Because we have to budget, and it is in the end all about money. What abilities do we have? What can we share? Some of these things we might need to share a body, whether it's a GIS body, if we don't have the permanent use, but if we have one for 3 towns. I mean, some of this stuff we may be able to
I definitely
share.
think I definitely think there's tons of money savings in regionalization on this. This is one of my big things. I think you can save a ton of money if you can regionalize some of these things.
Well, anybody who were connected to water or sewer, I would imagine that they would want to become part of this.
Well, some of
They're
our
gonna- They're
adjacent,
going to have to.
yeah, some of our adjacent communities don't have a lot of piped sewer. So, you know, you have Norwell and you have Hanover, they don't have a lot of sewer. So this, I mean, they have drain, but they're, oh my God, I just knocked it again. Their, you know, their priorities are going to be a little different than ours because we do have sewer. Luckily, I did some sampling for Dave. I maybe hit, what, 3 or 4 outfalls? I didn't find anything. So that's pretty good. And I think you brought me to some problem outfalls, things you thought were problems. Yeah, and I didn't, when I sampled them, I didn't get anything. So that's good, you know? I mean, I would, even when I was in Quincy, our aging sewer system, 100 years old, we probably in dry weather got hits 25 to 35%. I thought it would be 50. So we were even better there, and that's with a 100-year-old system. Here, our system, we've been lining it regularly because we're under consent to line it. So we do it, we invest in that regularly. Our system's not as old. So I think we actually probably have less cost there than other municipalities have older sewer systems.
Yeah, John is, you know, on the sewer, what they've been doing anyways, is when we had our meetings, John's been doing a ton of sewer lining,
Yeah.
which, just like Deirdre says, it is expensive, so he's been hammering his budget doing that, trying to get ahead on some of the roads that we're doing, you know, so we don't have issues with, you know, any of the underground infrastructure. And he's also been handling a lot of the cleanup of the outfalls out of his budget as well. So, you know, he's been doing a lot that may end up, you know, come over to us, maybe the cleanup of outfalls, or if he wants to keep it, you know, so we kind of spread out, you know, some of the costs there. Just like you said, maybe that's what you do is you put that in the fund for the finance when it's there.
Just to get a
Yeah.
better idea of what it's going to be
Yeah.
on a year-by-year basis, and then the next
will-
year, put
yeah.
it into the budgets.
When I met with finance, like I said, probably a month ago, we have everything broken down that we did for drainage for the whole year, you know, and where it came from. If it came out of our general budget, you know, if it came out of, you know, the road project, you know, obviously we didn't want to hit too much on the road project, but if it only cost $300 to do the street, you know, it made sense to do that. But when we got into the school project, we also had a lot of drainage updates to do. You know, we had full catchments that had to be rebuilt. There was not a lot of connectivity there, you know, outfalls. So we updated a lot of that, which came over to the general budget at that point. So that's where we were looking for that extra money, you know, to do the jetting, the vacuuming, you know, and if we got into an issue where we had to do, you know, a couple of rebuilds, you know, so we weren't hammering some of the general budget.
Yeah, and
for
that
the
stuff's
road
not
maintenance.
only important for pollution purposes, but for flooding. I mean, that impacts our residents directly.
Yeah.
Because that, you know, jetting, that good housekeeping stuff is, I mean, yeah, it's great for stormwater quality, water quality, and I know I'm a water quality person, but I think the primary benefit of that is reduces localized flooding. It's very important. All right, great,
Are
thank
we
you.
done? Can we
Thanks,
flush
Deirdre.
now?
It was great. Nice job. It was very good.
Very nicely done.
Thank you. Okay, moving right along. Next up, we have Town Administrator's Report and Correspondence. Mr. Chalker.
Mr. Chairman, I think I forwarded you some documents. You'll have to meet with Town Accountant Eric Hart to go over on the Jefferson School. There are some documents you need, so we received
Yeah,
that.
I've seen the email today.
We have been forwarded to further the project along for the school project. We do need one vote from the board tonight. The snow and ice account, which we are allowed and we annually do deficit spend, will be exhausted. We have not received the final bill, but as of today, I know the highway department ordered another 20 loads of salt. They've already been out 12 times this season, fiscal year, so when the bill comes in for the salt, we'll be over. Actually, this is kind of late for us because, as you know, there's not a lot of money in this snow account because of the way it's structured financially through DOR in the state. No town has increased their snow budget for the last, say, 30 years because it's the one spot where you are allowed to deficit spend, and we make up for it at the end of the year. We know what the actual bill is. So we need to have a motion and a vote to permit deficit spending in the snow and ice account.
I'll
second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, it's a vote, unanimous, thank you. And hopefully the storm won't be too bad for us this week.
There- Well,
Yeah, you did a good job, too.
for those of us watching the selectmen's meeting for news and weather updates, just before the meeting, we were watching, I think, and it said 12 to 15 inches in this area on Thursday, so.
Maybe more.
So you gotta get some sleep, Dave.
I want to tell you, I was in South Texas, came back New Year's Eve, and 5 days ago, the Weather Channel down there, the weather people were saying, yeah, Boston's gonna get an epic snowstorm coming up, and our guys were going, well, we think it's gonna go out to sea and everything else, but down there, they were on it 5 days ago.
Well, it's
They had the same snow?
No, they didn't get the same
kidding.
storm, they predicted our storm, that was the best part
I
about it.
can tell you it's a little
It
different,
starts down there.
but the weather for 10 days straight, it was 84 with a low of 74.
All right.
Thank
How's that
you, Mr.
culture shock?
Chairman.
Okay, next up, we have Selectmen's comments. Comments and opinions expressed by the individual members do not necessarily reflect the views of the Board of Selectmen and are the opinions and comments of only the individual member. With that, Deidre, you might as well continue on.
Yeah, I've talked a lot tonight. Thank you for listening so intently. And I just wanted to reiterate what I've been saying every week or every other week. The Teen Center is looking for volunteers for the Teen Center on Friday nights. It's from 7 to 10. We need people to come out, be there with the kids so that they continue to have a safe place to stay and enjoy themselves. So if you're interested in volunteering, you need to contact the Teen Center. I believe they have a Facebook page, or there's probably a number on the town website, if I remember correctly. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Laughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank everybody that came out and contributed. A couple weeks ago, I mentioned a former classmate of mine that is battling stage 3 breast cancer and is facing possible eviction. We had a fundraiser for her on the 21st, which wasn't great timing, being a couple of days before Christmas, but we were able to raise $4,000, just over $4,000, which should allow her to stay in her residence for the next 3 or 4 months. Looking to possibly do another fundraiser, but she's also been nominated by a charitable group for a possible $20,000 reward for being for going through her struggles and stuff like that. So it's light at the end of the tunnel, but the $4,000 that was raised will definitely help her over the next few months. So just thank you to everybody in the community that helped out. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan.
Except for Happy New Year, I'm just going to reiterate what Deirdre said, that there's committees that need people in the town of Rockland. Let's make it your New Year's resolution to get out there and be part of the town government, whether it be on an appointed committee or an elected position. There's always something to do in the town of Rockland, and the town is really going well, and an awful lot of its assets are being used now for everybody's benefit. So come on out and join us and be part of the town of Rockland's answer to the future. And we need some young people. We've got some good young stock on this board now, and I'd like to see more people like these people come out and join us and be part of it. And with that, that's all I got.
Thank you. Mr. Mullen?
Just 2 quick things. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, late last year, we launched the Reimagine Rockland effort, and I'm happy to say that this month, over the next 2 or 3 weeks, we'll be really kickstarting a lot of our work, in the 5 areas that we have. Each of our 5 subcommittees have now set up their first meetings to begin talking about ways they can help begin addressing the goals for each of the subcommittee. And actually, later this month, we'll have our first steering committee meeting where the chairs of each of the 5 subcommittees come together and to make sure we're talking about how we can support each other. So that's exciting. I expect some really exciting news over the next a few weeks to the month once we do have the steering committee meeting. We're waiting also to hear back on a few grant applications that the town has submitted and applied for over the past 5 weeks or so. So that's also exciting. So we'll keep you posted on that. Secondly, I just want to thank Deirdre and Dave for everything tonight and the work that they do on a regular basis with John Laughlin as well. You know, this issue, the whole MS4 permit and the implementation of it is, you know, is an issue that, as everyone mentioned, is really coming down the pike quickly. But it's, it was really just, you know, like refreshing tonight to see Deirdre, like as an elected member of our board, but also as like an expert in this area, really give us, you know, the whole picture overview, break it down for people who, like me, who really, you know, this, that's not my bailiwick, but what became evident and has always been evident for quite some time now is like we do have elected officials and our department heads in this community, who work together. You know, they support each other, and you know, the work that they're doing every day is like is far above what I think a lot of people really appreciate and recognize. So I just wanted to thank you, Deirdre, Dave, and John Laughlin as well, but all of our department heads as well for the work they do. So that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I just want to wish everybody a happy new year and look forward to some goals that are coming up in the town. Obviously, we have a new school project that's coming up on queue, and there'll be more talk about that for elementary school. We're looking at possibly a renovation or a relocation of the fire station the upcoming year. We're looking at the Reimagine Rockland and downtown revitalization. That seems to be going strong. The Reeds Pond issue seems to be working its way to a solution with the state. Zoning seems to be the hot place to be tonight. I don't know what the outcomes are down there tonight, but I'm sure we'll find out shortly. Soon we should have a medical marijuana facility in operation in Rockland. One of our applicants actually was approved by the state, and they're under construction. We're going to be faced with looking at how we deal with recreational marijuana in the upcoming months. And Union Point's, you know, hopefully will be a news story. We haven't heard nothing back from Amazon yet, but we're hoping that this year is going to prove to be a good starting point for Union Point, which again will give us hopefully future tax revenue for the town. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention that with the snowstorm coming, based on what the forecast from Texas says, we want to make sure.
That's great. Beats our guys.
We want to really check in on our elderly neighbors and things like that, because with the cold weather, I know a lot of people have been housebound, and it's supposed to be cold after the storm. We might have a little bit of rain from the forecast and some ice, and I know Dave's done a great job thus far, and I know he'll do a great job for this storm, but it's a chance to go out and take a look, and you know, it seems that that's when people become neighbors again, you know, in times of need. So Rockland always seems to do that. And lastly, for anybody who's interested in running for any electeds, nomination papers will be available on January 8th, I believe. And they're due back on February 22nd, or up to February 22nd you can get them, and they must be returned by the 23rd of February for any electeds who are looking to seek elected office. And again, get back to the stormwater and the permits. It seems that Rockland always seems to take the lead, which is great, and that we do have a diverse group of people out there, whether they're on this board or other boards in town or just in the community. So it's good to see that everyone's taking an active role, and once again, Rockland wants to be ahead of the curve instead of behind the curve. So I think it's good, and I think it was actually enlightening to learn a little bit more about some of the things we all take for granted. You know, that water goes away, and you know, you do flush your toilet and it flushes, you know, and things like that. I mean, and not without the hard work of, you know, town employees and things like that. I mean, we take a lot for granted. And just because of the work of others that, you know, are in that role. And just as we do on our own private roles. I mean, we rely on that, so. With that, that's all I have for tonight, and to thank everybody for tuning in. I know there's some people who came here mistakenly, but looking for zoning, so. To Texas?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all for tuning in. Thanks, and have a great night.
Thanks, Dave.